If you told me tomorrow that I had to start over from absolute zero with no degree, no connections, and no construction experience, but I wanted to become a construction estimator, I'd do it completely different. Because after 20 years in the commercial construction, I've learned what actually matters and what wastes your time. And I'm not going to sit here and say that going to college is a waste of time. I'm going to say it's an expensive way to get to where you're trying to go when you can do it far cheaper and far quicker. So today I'm going to show you exactly how I'd become a construction estimator if I had to start all over. Welcome back to Build Smart with Will Martin, where we use technology, AI, and real world work experience to help you build better career paths. And if that's something you're interested in, hammer that subscribe and pound that like button. I would go ahead and try the free construction estimating course. You can start at the link below. The link below will also get you $50 off the whole course if you decide to take the course. I highly recommend it if you're trying to get into construction estimating. Course careers will set you up on the path, because owners of companies that need construction estimators, they're not looking for a guy that's got a 4-year degree. That's not the case anymore. They're looking for the guy that's able to use the program, talk the lingo, and be able to start right now. So, like I said, link below, check it out. You guys are gonna like it. We're gonna jump over to the dumb board. $100,000 a year with course careers, pre-construction estimating. Junior estimators, they start out around $75,000 to $80,000 a year. So that's nothing to laugh at. If that's something you think you can work towards, the cost of a course careers course will run you right through. You can start off, I would say their hiring is probably about 2 weeks is the process for most places. So within a two-week period, you're making $80,000 a year, chasing that 100. So, and this 100 goes plus. Construction documents or CDs, that's what you'll kind of start out as. You'll get a set of plans. They're not going to be 100%. They're not going to be 95%. They're going to be about 50 to 60% plans. That's why. And then you will develop that. You'll RFIs. You'll say, hey, this, and that'll get you to your 100% CDs. Course Careers is going to teach you to navigate these documents. A set of plans is kind of like a flip through playbook, if you will. You you'll get an elevation picture, which is kind of a west elevation, we'll say, of the whole west side, and then you'll get a breakdown on a further architectural page of that. And then you can go over to your plumbing, you can go over to your mechanical, and you'll have to get those breakdowns, and you'll have to price each one of those. So it's not easy, but it can be done. It's not that difficult once you get used to it. Takeoff from these docs are going to include your labor costs, material costs, your equipment costs, subcontractor costs, direct and indirect costs, and most importantly, your overhead and profit. So let's talk about labor costs. Labor costs are going to be how much it costs you to have supervision on site, how much your superintendent costs, how much it costs you to estimate this, how much it costs a project manager to run the project, and everything in between there. If you've got any labor that you're including that's going to be self-performed, that's going to be included in your labor costs. Now, there's a lot that you can plug into labor costs, such as cleaning. You'll do daily cleaning, you'll do a final clean. These things are labor costs, and they should be considered in your general conditions. Or GCs. So once you got your GCs figured out, you'll move on to your material costs. How much is it going to cost me in material that I'm going to be putting in? So you'll want to get quantities and materials. So concrete, so many cubic yards is $15 a cubic yard. And then you're going to have to figure out how many cubic yards you're going to estimate you're going to need on that. Other things you can look at, $3 or $4 per linear foot of 2-inch pipe. You might have some saw cutting if it's a remodel. That's $12, $13 a foot, linear foot. Just whatever your material costs are. Actually, I'm sorry, saw cutting will go into labor. Caught me. Equipment costs. So are you going to have a SkyTrack? Are you gonna have to have lifts? Are you gonna have to have a boom lift? Are you gonna have to have a refrigerator truck? Are you gonna, anything that's equipment cost, you gotta account for that. Now subcontractor costs. A lot of these costs should be included kind of together. Typically what I do, which is kind of a shortcut, is I say, okay, I estimate that I've got, X amount of feet of pipe, and then I'll go to my plumber and I'll say, hey, here's a set of plans, figure out how much it's gonna cost, send me a breakout of that cost, labor, markup, and material. And then I use that to just kind of keep a record of if my material costs are pretty on par or not. And so my subcontractor costs is going to be what I issue the subcontract for. That is not necessarily going to include everything, because you will have, like, oftentimes you'll have HVAC subs that do not include gas piping hookup to HVAC. That's going to be a plumber. Just things like that. So you've got to know the game and you've got to learn, and they're going to understand you're a junior estimator, so you're learning, and they're going to be there to watch over you. So direct and indirect costs. I like to call these the play-by-plays. So direct costs are going to be permits, which this is kind of, I wanted to put this up here with labor costs and general conditions, but because this is where I always put direct and indirect costs. But so you're going to have, if you're working within a city, you're going to have permitting costs, you're going to have these other costs, and then you're going to have indirect costs that are still going to be something like cost of energy for a transformer installation or something like that. You've got to account for those. So those are phone calls and emails, days and weeks that you're going to be running ragged trying to figure this stuff out. So we'll move on to overhead and profit. Overhead and profit, that's your takeaway from the job. This is how much it's going to cost you to do the job, and this is going to be your profit after the job. Now, you can get into things like fee and this and that, but those are separate from your overhead and your profit in my playbook. Some people I've seen consider fee part of profit. Fee is part of overhead doing business to the owner, is the way I look at it. So next, once we've figured all this out, we're going to develop our estimate. And so to develop this estimate, we'll take all these costs. Let's just say 100,000. That's a good number. So it's going to cost us $100,000 to do this project. Once we've gone back and double checked everything, we're going to start applying our indirect cost qualified estimate. So we've got our estimate of $100,000. We expect there's going to be $15,000 from energy. We expect that there will be $10,000 from the city, and we're going to go ahead and put in a contingency of, you usually want it to be 10% of that, so $10,000 for contingency. So that's $35,000 right there. So that $100,000 turns into $135K. And then after we've done that, we're going to put it all together and we're going to get it ready to present. Once we get it ready to present, we're going to offer it to the owner and say, hey, we're looking at $135K to do your project. They look at that and they say, no, we did our takeoff and we're at 100,000. So now we're going to get into value engineering, or VE. So we want this 135 as close to 100,000 because that's their budget as we can get. So we go back to our subcontractors, and that's the first place I hit. Say subs, what can we do? What items can we change? What quantities can we change to make this a little cheaper? So they come back and let's say they've knocked $20,000 off of it. So now we're at 135, 115K, but we're still not there. So we're going to go up here to our labor costs and our material costs. Once we start looking at these labor costs and we're saying, okay, I've got, X amount of days. Let's say we got 154 days of labor costs in there for our superintendent. That's kind of got to stay because we've got to be able to pay him, right? What else can we look at? We can look at, are we going to need 50 dumpster pulls the whole job? No, we're going to need like 5 or 6 for the whole job. So there's a cost we can cut. And we're going to look around at, do we have to have cleanup every day, or is that something that, usually it's in the subcontractors subcontract to clean up after themselves. So that's something we can cut a guy out of there. So that saves us some money. So now we're down, let's say we knocked 12 off that. So now we're down to 130,000. So now we're at 103K. All right, we're close. We go back to the owner, like, look, hey, we got close. So let's just say they accept 103,000 is what it's going to cost for us to do this. That's kind of the process in a nutshell of construction estimating. And what you'll get with course careers is, they start out with an introduction to estimating, and then that's 3 or 4 lessons, and then you're going to develop your definitions, you're going to develop your concepts, kind of get the lingo of what it takes to speak with a subcontractor, to speak with a senior estimator, what you need to know there. And then we're going to start understanding our construction documents. That's a whole lesson. That's a big one. There's one for types of construction estimating. Yeah, there are different types and methods and this and that. I've done it. I like to do it with AI is how I prefer to do it. I'll take my plans, drop it into AI, get me a quick takeoff, go back, double check it, make sure it's right, adjust where I need to. Because AI is not ever 100%, but it's really close. I know guys that have colored pencils that sit down and it takes them a week to do something that AI does for me in 30, 45 minutes. But that being said, they're very accurate that way. I'm very accurate my way. It's just all in what exercise you want to run. So next we're going to do the cost components of construction. That'll be a whole lesson topic that will cover kind of the labor costs, material costs, equipment, subcontractors, direct and indirect costs, overhead and profit. And then it will go over, it'll move to developing the estimate, and you're going to go over each individual step and what you need to do. I think that's a few lessons. And then the quantity takeoff exercise. This one's big. Pay attention to it. It's like 6 or 7 lessons long. And from here on out, pricing and then summarizing the estimate or presenting the estimate, huge, because you've got to present the estimate in a way an owner understands it. I like to, it just depends on the job really. If I've got a big job, I like to break it out so that I don't have to go back and do it again. I like to break out, hey, you're going to be, your MEP is going to be this. These are your general condition costs. Just break it down kind of like a menu and give it to them. Other times, with like this $100,000 job, I'd say, we propose that we can do this project, and this project will include for $103,000. It just really, and then it also depends on the owner. Sometimes the owner will come back and say, I need an itemized breakdown of everything, where my costs, where my money are going. And that's, the owner spent a lot of money and we owe that to them. So we go ahead and I'll break that down. It's kind of a guess there for me. Tools and software. Starting out, you're solely on the discretion of whoever you're working for and whatever they provide you with. You've not got the money or the experience to say, hey, we should be using, while you're doing, let's just say you've got a company that works primarily with Microsoft Project for scheduling. Well, some people like P6. P6 is for your big $1 million jobs, right? Project is perfect for these little jobs. Project's also good for $1 million job. There's nothing wrong with, I use Project on multiple jobs, costs. It doesn't really affect me, but that's just what my company uses is Project. Take that one with a grain of salt and understand that you're going to be doing some on-the-job training with whatever software they give you. Like I've used Procore. I've used all kinds of construction management software, and I prefer Procore. So next, you're going to be doing what's, your bidder responsibilities are scoping out the bidders and understanding your ITBs and setting up your bid tabs and bid tab estimates and a little bit of risk assessments, and then your final selection throughout all your subcontractors that have provided. Okay, this one kind of screwed me here, but he delivered. Well, I haven't worked with this one at all, but he's got a bad name in the industry. I haven't worked with this one, but he's got a great name in the industry. Where are we falling price wise? What's our risk assessment for completion, on time completion? And then once you got all that, you get into mitigating your risks, understanding estimate risks, what can go wrong, you miss a couple of things, you're off a couple $1,000. Yeah, not too bad. You can make that up. You miss 2 or 3 things that are, $50,000-$60,000 a pop, you're off $100,000. That can make or break a job. And the techniques that you're going to use are covered very heavily in course careers. I thought that was a good little exercise for figuring out what techniques and everything. And then of course it goes over some legal and ethical, implications of doing stuff right and wrong. There's like a final exam. So went through the course, and I completed it in about 3 weeks. That's just because I knew most of it. Starting out, I would say maybe 5 to 6 weeks if you're putting in 3 to 4 hours a day on this. That's Monday through Friday. I would say that's a reasonable amount of time for you to complete that. So if any of this is interesting you, I would go ahead and try the free construction estimating course. You can start at the link below. The link below will also get you $50 off the whole course if you decide to take the course.